Welcome to Leadership, the unapologetic political podcast where we dive headfirst into the world of leadership, politics, and those pivotal issues that often go unaddressed. We're here to empower, educate, and ignite change with a special focus on inspiring women to step into positions of influence. In this podcast, we don't shy away from tough conversations. We're all about getting down to brass tacks, discussing what truly matters, and encouraging you to take the reins. Join us on this journey as we unravel the intricacies of leadership, delve into the political landscape, and tackle the uncharted territories of vital issues. Leadership is your platform for unfiltered, honest, and inspiring discussions that will drive you to make your mark on the world. Let's get started. Hi there, and welcome to Leadership with Tammy Wilson. Today, I'm speaking with Justice Michael Donnelly. He is running for Ohio Supreme Court. This will be his second time running for office. Welcome, Michael. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, I've been trying to get you on here forever.
My pleasure.
Yeah, we share a lot of the same passions. I know that we run into each other at different events, and one of the events that I ran into you at was at the death row protest up in Cleveland. And I was really shocked to find out that Cleveland has the highest number of death row convictions in the nation. Now, with that being said, is it safe to assume that they have the highest number of wrongful convictions as well?
You know, I've never seen the data. I've heard that remark, but I was a judge in Cuyahoga County for 14 years, and during that time, I saw a system that was badly in need of reform, especially for people who raise claims of being innocent. In Ohio, basically, the status quo right now is people file motions for new trials, and they claim to have new evidence that, if true, would undermine the theory of guilt that was used to convict the people at trial. And it may surprise your listeners, but in Ohio, if you claim to have that evidence, you are not entitled to a hearing in open court to show the judge and have this evidence tested. The judge can sometimes rule just on the motions, even though there's witnesses recanting, new evidence in the form of DNA, proof that the science that convicted the innocent claimant was junk science at the time of the prosecution. It could be any one of a number of these things, but the judge can simply rule on the motion that has been opposed by the state. And sometimes these motions languish for years before they receive a ruling, and they'll be denied without a hearing. And then the next course, next scope in the litigation will proceed to the Court of Appeals. And sometimes they're fortunate to have the case reversed, and the Court of Appeals will say, "Judge, you have to hold a hearing on this." But right now, as a result of the Conviction Integrity Task Force that I was a part of, we have proposed legislation in the State House that would require hearings whenever someone claimed to have this type of evidence. And I'm very hopeful that that will pass because it will advance the system. Sometimes
So,
people, I'm sorry, go ahead.
is that unique to Ohio then? So every state has their own.
Yeah,
I don't
every
know.
state has their own post-conviction laws, and how
Wow.
post-conviction proceeds. And it's sad, but sometimes people will litigate these wrongful conviction claims for literally, up a decade, not on the merits of the case, but on just to try to get the opportunity to get a hearing in
Due
open court.
process.
Yeah, and so sometimes they need to get the press involved. They have to get
Oh,
celebrities involved.
have you seen that movie on Netflix,
Wi-
Making a Murderer, about
Oh
Stephen
yeah,
Avery?
yeah. Yeah, there's all sorts of good content out there right now, in terms of wrongful convictions. There's a documentary, the Michael Morton story, An Unreal Dream, it's called, and it involved a wrongful conviction in Texas. A man was uh, convicted of murdering his wife. The state's theory that was that they got in a fight and he murdered her, but he all he always maintained that when he left for work that day, she was alive, and he came home, uh, and he fought for years. I think he did over 2 decades of time in prison, and he fought for years to get a bandana that was left at the scene tested. And the state fought him tooth and nail, and finally he won. And they tested the bandana, and the DNA was put into CODIS's database of known offenders,
Yeah.
and found out that it was an individual who not only committed the murder of his wife, but 2 years later did the same thing to another person. So this shows you, wrongful conviction. Not only do the innocent who are suffer as a result of it, but the real perpetrator is left
Left loose. Yeah.
to harm to harm
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
really need to do something to stop this.
I did a podcast. I don't know if you saw it, but it was about Denise Amber Lee, and she was murdered in Florida. And, like police officers do, they go to the husband first, and but her husband, obviously, he didn't kill her. Well, I shouldn't say obviously, but her father was a police officer. And so he has been advocating, he's been going across the country and educating police officers. Don't just get stuck on the husband. Exhaust all of your other possibilities first, because they could be getting away. And so I found that really interesting. But the other thing that you just mentioned, which I, didn't know until, well, it's been some time now, but I don't think the common person is aware when they collect evidence, if they aren't already a criminal, that they already have, their fingerprints, that's not going to show up in their database, like you just said. And that's something that you just don't think about, I mean, you watch CSI or, all of these detective shows or whatever, and it looks so easy, but there is it seems like, I know that we're so far advanced, but we're also so antiquated too. I found that really amazing.
Well, there's a lot of disparity in resources, like
Yeah.
in a state as
And how long it takes to test too.
right. I mean, that's another thing that I've been advocating for is data collection, um, in by our state legislature in terms of criminal sentencing and all the information that we should be collecting, to help our policymakers make good laws that promote public safety and promote the search for the truth, because that's what the justice system exists for. It exists to bring resolution to conflict in people's lives, whether it's a criminal case or a civil case. And it also is there to protect the rights that are enshrined in our Constitution and our state laws. So, um, you know, I've been working in the system, a long time now, too long than I cared to admit, but there's always room for improvement. When I started in the system as a young prosecutor in the early 90s, we didn't have known what we now have is open discovery, where the prosecution has to turn over to the defense police reports, witness statements, anything that they're basing that if they go to trial on, has information about that. What would happen at pretrials is in the early 90s, I would read that information to the defense attorney, and the defense attorney would have to take copious notes, and they would have to trust that I was giving them everything that
Right.
they needed to assess the case, assess the merits of the case. And finally, um, not that long ago, the defense bar in the state rose up and said, this is not fair.
Yeah.
A lot of people thought they were being ambushed at trial. They were learning things the day before the trial that completely changed the way they were looking at the case or defending the case, and they felt like they were being ambushed, and
Yeah.
so they rose up and they said, "We want to be able to see these things." And the Supreme Court responded after a lot of resistance from a lot of corners of the state, and once they did, the system became more fair, and the more transparent we can make the system,
Yeah.
the collection of data. Plea bargains should not be discussed as they are so much, in my opinion, back in the judge's chambers with just the prosecutor, the defense attorney, the defendant whose life's going to be affected by what's being discussed back there. And if there's a victim in the case, they're not back there either. So,
Yeah.
my when I was on the trial court, I did things a little differently. Very early on, as a trial court judge, I came to the conclusion that no one should say anything in the back room, including the judge,
Yeah.
that they would repeat verbatim on the record. So one
Yeah.
day I said to my bailiff, "Hey, let's do something. We're going to do things a little differently. We're not going to have any more discussions back in the back room. We can do everything on the record. That way, whatever is represented by any party in a criminal dispute will be taken down with the court reporter and memorialized." So I think that transparency um, encourages public confidence in our justice system.
Oh, I think it's so important. I met a gentleman, um, sorry, I don't know. I met a gentleman from Cincinnati, and the prosecutor held like over 162 pieces of evidence. And this man was wrongfully convicted, and he went to jail. He had 6 days of execution, and he was finally just released, like, I don't know, like a couple years ago, I think it was. It wasn't very long ago. Um, you probably know who I'm talking about, but I'm just that just blew me away.
Yeah,
I just couldn't believe that.
yeah, that's a big problem, and we always have. Fortunately, I was trained by some prosecutors when I was a young prosecutor and started my legal career, who were very honest and believe in that kind of hiding the ball. And I had mentors that stress that prosecutors need to be looking out for justice and truth, not necessarily a conviction. I've always thought that we should have a rule that requires prosecutors to always have a good faith belief that the person they're prosecuting is actually guilty of the. And if they learn information that calls that into question, then they should respond accordingly. And if a conviction has occurred, then I applaud prosecutors who start their own conviction integrity units to understand that the system is fallible. It makes mistakes. Juries make
Yeah.
mistakes,
Yeah.
and we need to have those checks and balances built into the post conviction part of the system.
Right. Speaking of that, I mean, I know there isn't anything in Ohio that would ever be not up to par or totally ethical, but what would be, because I'm just really shocked that Cleveland has the highest number in the nation for death row convictions. So I'm just curious, why is that? Because I mean, I always look at everything from different, you know, perspectives. And so what would be like the gain to have that many death row convictions? I mean, is there money to be made there, or what is the deal? What would be the ulterior motive
Well,
if
um,
there was one? I'm not saying there is one. I'm just if there was one, what could it be?
I'll give you my opinion, and it's actually not my opinion. It was actually first expressed by Justice Paul Pfeiffer, who is now head of the Ohio Judicial Conference, and he was a former justice on the Ohio Supreme Court, and he, in a number of death penalty opinions, basically pointed out the fact that um, it only seems to be pr- prosecuted in the areas of the state that can afford it, because prosecution of death penalty cases is very costly.
Yeah.
And um, and so judges or prosecutors have discretion when they want to bring the death penalty specifications in any case. And oftentimes, if some crime that really horrible murder happens in rural areas, you'll see this dynamic. And I've seen it at the cases at the Ohio Supreme Court where the death penalty, even though it involves horrible, arguably worst of the worst types of cases, it's not even pursued because the counties lack the the funding to pursue the case. So you have a law that's supposed to apply equally as possible across the state of Ohio, um, and it's only pursued, however, in areas that have the money to fund that type of prosecution. Um, and as a result, as Justice Piper once said, it's kind of like a lottery. It's not so much what you do in the crime, it's where you committed. And that's why you see a disparate amount of prosecutions generally being prosecuted in the major metropolitan areas, but not in the rural areas.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So I know that sentencing reform is very important to you. And I was really moved the first time I ever heard you speak. It was at Auglaize County. They had a dinner there. And um, can you kind of explain to the audience what you mean by sentence reform and why that is so important and needed?
Sure. Yeah. So our sentencing laws that exist right now were basically with some changes that have happened over the years, but the basic sentencing scheme was imposed way back in 1996. It was supposed to be truth in sentencing because people thought um, they were being lied to. People, we used to have indefinite terms of sentencing, like 5 to 25 for really serious crimes, and then so they were people were sentenced on an indefinite range, and then it was the prison system's job once they went into the system to assess whether they were rehabilitated, whether it was safe for them to be released through a parole system. And that changed in 1996, and they got rid of the parole system for those for a great many cases, and put the parole supervision on the end of the sentence. Um, and all this power got invested in trial court judges and prosecutors because a prosecutor can look at any factual scenario and based on the number of crimes that are independently supported by the facts they can charge all those crimes, and whatever's left on the table after a plea bargain or a trial is going to give the judge a huge uh, swath of discretion in terms of what that judge wants to do with the person. And Ohio judges, unlike federal court judges, don't have data that keeps track of their own sentences and sentences of their fellow colleagues. So they don't, even though the law says you are to treat similarly situated defendants with
Yeah.
similar crimes, um, regardless of the color of their skin or socioeconomic place in society, you're there's really no mechanism that allows a state Ohio trial court judge to do that other than just to go with you know, their gut and try to remain consistent.
So
Uh,
other states do track, but we
yes,
don't.
yeah, federal system does, and other states are moving in this direction, like Florida and New Jersey. And if you talk to a federal judge, they have at their fingertips uh, a huge amount of data that helps keep their sentences consistent with themselves and proportionate to the conduct involved. And uh, that's a problem. Proportionality is a problem in the state of Ohio because you'll see sometimes nonviolent, like theft related cases in receiving decades long prison sentence, and then you'll see on the other end of the spectrum, sex offenders getting very lenient, unexplainably lenient. So you get the
Yeah.
unexplainably lenient and the unexplainably excessive sentence, and there's no check because there doesn't really exist the ability, based on a number of decisions that have come out of the Ohio Supreme Court, decisions that I dissented on, that has basically, in my opinion, stripped the courts of appeals from their ability to review sentences and provide meaningful review to those sentences. And so, with no parole system, so, there's people out there that have received, there was a highly publicized case of Susan Gwynn in Delaware County, who, I'm not trying to minimize what she did. She hurt a lot of people because she stole items of personal property from nursing homes over time, and she was hoarding this property, and it was not necessarily property that traditional thieves take for resale value on the street. She was hoarding this in her house, which, to me, I was a mental health court judge for 9 years, so these kind of facts kind of triggered an alarm that maybe there was a mental health issue. And she entered a plea bargain, and she was not promised anything, and the judge had a lot of discretion, and the prosecution was silent at her plea hearing as to what they intended to advocate for. She entered a plea, and then 30 days later, uh, the prosecution asked for a sentence of 42 years in prison, and the defense lawyer, her lawyer, asked for probation, and the judge imposed a 65-year sentence. So Susan Gwynn found out on her sentencing date she wasn't going home that day on probation. She
My
was going
God.
to die in prison because she had to reach the age of 120 before she fulfilled her sentence. And
Wow.
yeah, so and there's nothing, as long as the judge says that they consider the applicable Ohio statutes on the record, as long as it fits within that statutory range, it's going to be upheld. And the only way I see, the only pathway towards keeping these sentences consistent and proportional is by adequate collection of data, which we should be moving as soon as we possibly can towards.
Wow. Yeah, I totally agree with you about that. Same thing with the police department. They don't track in Columbus or Franklin County. I know they do in Cincinnati. So I just find it so interesting. To me, it seems like a no-brainer that you should have a streamlined system, federally and through the state and to the county with certain things. And, police and the judicial system, I would think would be at the top of that list. So,
Yeah, I mean,
wow.
the system runs on good information. I, no judge would ever go out and conduct a sentencing hearing without wanting to first read a pre-sentence report that's created about, what happened in the crime, how it impacted the victims, what is the person's criminal record. These judges are doing that every single day, but we could advance the system so much more, because then advocates could come in and show the judge, this is how you've sentenced these type of cases in the past. This will help you. This will help keep you consistent. There's a case out of Franklin County, an anecdote that I find so compelling. An attorney named Diane Menashe there. She was representing someone who had been charged with involuntary manslaughter. It was a heroin addict who had tragically given a fatal dose of heroin to some fellow addict, and they were charged with involuntary manslaughter. And they were trying to negotiate an agreed sentence, and the state did not want to engage in this. So they were before a judge that they thought was a fair judge, and they decided to take their chances with the judge. They entered a plea agreement. Some of the counts were dismissed in exchange for a plea of guilty. And then Diane learned through word of mouth that the state intended to ask for 13 years. And intuitively, she thought that was way more severe than she had seen similar cases treated. So she did what most defense attorneys don't have the time to do. She invested about 50 hours of work and research and finding similar cases and
Looking
showing
for precedent.
showing the judge,
Mm.
hey, this is how other people have been treated. And when they went to that hearing, which I'm sure was very emotional, as any case involving the death of someone is going to be, Diane filed a sentencing memorandum and reminded the judge of their legal obligation to follow the law and treat similarly situated defendants with similar sentences. And the judge remarked on the record that he could not um, overlook this data because to do otherwise would be arbitrary. Judges want to be fair. So if you show the judge the evidence that this is how you've treated people in the past, then they're only going to do something different if they can articulate a good reason why. Like this person didn't have a record, this person did. The judges do that every day and try to do their best, but we could be doing, in my opinion, um, better decision making with more information.
Well, I mean, the other aspect of that is it would also save court time because, like you said, if there is, another case that shows precedent with a more fair sentencing, I mean, that attorney would obviously appeal the case, right? And then
Right.
they have to go through another hearing.
Right.
So that would be a waste of time. I mean, we were talking earlier about the systemic delay. So that,
Yeah. Well, I'm sure a lot of your listeners have encountered that if they've been in, let's say, domestic relations court, um, or muni court with some type of claim. The biggest complaint I hear and the biggest threat to public confidence in our civil courts is this delay that exists. People, you've heard probably the slogan before that justice delayed is justice denied, and I firmly believe that's true. There's a divorce case in Cuyahoga County that's been involving two, a doctor, I believe, and his wife. They're trying to get a divorce. The case was filed in 2017, and last I checked, it was still pending. So judges need to provide litigants with what I've often called is ruling date certainty and trial date certainty.
yeah,
When you get in, when you proper case management of the trial court involves giving the litigants a light at the end of the tunnel when they have a complaint, so that they can either go before a jury or if they have a motion to dismiss what they think is a frivolous claim, then it should be ruled on, as soon as possible. And so
right.
uh, I've taken steps at the Ohio Supreme Court since arriving there to especially in judicial training and in the judicial college, and working to have notifications processes set up so that you don't have to file a motion against the judge or a writ. But there's a writ of procedendo that basically gets a judge to do what they're supposed to do in the first place. A lot of attorneys don't like to file that against the judge that they're seeking a favorable ruling from. So
Yeah.
we've created at the Ohio Supreme Court a gentler way of notifying the court. But
Yeah.
this is something that I hope to continue working on, um, and making the system much more efficient than it is now.
So does it just like send a request through the system or something like,
Yeah,
hey,
you can basically call our case management office at the Ohio Supreme Court if you have a motion or a case that's not moving. You can call them, and they will call the judge and very gently remind them, Judge, is there a reason why this case isn't moving towards resolution? So if your listeners out there are engaged in some type of litigation and they're running into that kind of delay, they can call the they go to the Ohio Supreme Court website. You can find the case management department office there and call them, and they have a form you fill out, and they will contact the judge and get that case moving for you.
wow. You know, the bedrock of America or democracy is the judicial system. And, we have some interesting things going on right now in our country. Um, We have a Justice Thomas who, refuses to recuse himself. What are your thoughts about that? Uh,
Yeah, you know what? I think the rules of professional conduct are pretty clear for judges. If there, even if you feel that you can be fair, if there's something about the case or something about the litigants in the case that would give the public the
right.
appearance of impropriety, then
Yeah.
you're you're instructed to get off the case. And I've done that before. If I friends with one of the attorneys and I've socialized with them, then I'll generally remove myself from the case. If I know one of the litigants in the case, I'm going to remove myself from the case. If all the disciplinary cases involving judges that I served with in Cuyahoga County that were brought, I recused myself from that because I didn't want to give the appearance of impropriety in that case. One case at the Ohio Supreme Court involved a decision that I made as a trial court judge. So obviously I couldn't sit on that because I made the decision before. So yeah, so I'm very quick to recuse if there's even the slightest um, indicia of the appearance of impropriety.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I
So, I
think
mean, he's taken bribes. His wife was involved with
well, I don't
the,
think he's been convicted of taking bribes, but what's happened is that he's apparently accepted very lavish gifts. In Ohio, we're 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 required to report any a gift or something of value over $100 that you receive from anyone.
oh,
If
it's
you
100 now?
Yeah, anything over that it used to be 75, I think, but now I think it's 100. But don't hold me to that. I think it's 100 now. But anything that you receive of value from anyone, you need to report that because that creates a record um, that people can use to judge whether you should be on a case or not.
Well, he had to be told to do that too. I mean,
I think
he
as a result of the press bringing those stories to light, they have
yeah.
just adopted a new code of conduct. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, I mean this all goes to public confidence. And you made quote that the judicial system is the bedrock of our democracy, and that's good reason because as Americans, we live under this concept. We're always going to disagree on policy matters, right? I mean, there's always going to be disagreements about that. But once something gets settled and we pass it as laws, we agree to follow the law, whether we agree with it or not, as judges.
Well,
And
you
so
can't say that without addressing the abortion issue.
yeah, I mean, you could like let's take a case that was highly publicized, the redistricting cases. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was in the majority that found a lot of the maps were unconstitutional, and you know, there were dissents in that case that thought they were, and that's going to be the dispute. But the the decision was 4-3 that they were unconstitutional, and you know, we saw a response that didn't seem to follow the court's instruction. And in America, you know, if you disagree with the law, you change the law. But until the law is changed, you have to follow it, right? So
You would think.
yeah, that's the way it's supposed to be. Like, there's plenty of laws on the books that I could argue with about whether they properly achieve policy objectives or um, but you know, I'm sworn to follow as a judicial officer just to follow the law until it's changed, and
So,
that's
with that said, here we have unconstitutional maps that we are still voting on.
yeah. A
I
lot of
mean,
people wrote me and said, why doesn't the court exercise its contempt? Why do they go arrest these people? And the fact is, courts do not have armies or they don't have constables that do that. We rely on the rule of law that the respect for the rule of law. Like I disagree. I'm sure you've seen court decisions where the party receives, an unfavorable ruling, and they might say, I disagree, but uh, the law's the law, right? We that's the principle that makes um, our democracy special. That's what keeps us all together, unified as one country. We're a nation of laws, not men, and people don't get
Right.
to pick and choose which laws they enforce or follow. So,
So, I mean, what is the process to address that other than having a ballot initiative? Shouldn't someone file a court case, about the map?
well, we had several cases in litigation, and as a result, you have people out there that believe that the initial constitutional amendment was not effective in dealing with the problem of um, unlawful redistricting. And so as a result, you would now see momentum that appears to be heading towards the ballot in 2024 for making an independent commission and not having um, elected officials be in charge of the map drawing.
Yeah.
Yeah, independent commission that has to draw the maps in public.
Yeah.
Again, that gets back to transparency, and
Yeah. Right.
that's 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 something that is the most important ingredient in making sure our democracy is functioning correctly.
So I have to ask you on that independent commission, on the ballot initiative that they're trying to pass now to have the 15 people on that independent committee. Who chose 15 and why 15? I mean, it's hard to get 15 people to agree about anything. And I'm like, oh my God, the maps of all things. I just think that that would be a nightmare.
Well, I'm not sure about all the details. I think it's 15 because I think there were going to be 5 Democratic representatives, 5 Republicans, and then 5 truly independent
Yeah.
people. And they wanted as many people. That's who make up most of our electorate in Ohio. Democrats, Republicans, and probably the vast amount of people who are just independent voters. And
Yeah.
so their voices need to be heard as well. And you want to make sure that these maps are being drawn fairly, proportionally, and not dividing up um, interested communities, and making sure that everyone gets to choose their representative rather than the other way around. The
Right.
representatives get to
Yeah.
choose who their voters are. So,
How it's supposed to be.
yeah.
Um, Now with the Trump trials, what are your thoughts about the Supreme Court and delaying their decision? Um, I'm worried that it will not come out before the election. Don't you think that is an injustice to the country? I mean, what should we do as citizens to implore them to, you know, get a decision out soon as possible?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the notion of justice delayed is justice denied. These are obviously matters of great public importance, so I'm glad that the U.S. Supreme Court has taken them in. But we do the same thing at the Ohio Supreme Court when we prioritize and triage our.
Wouldn't that be a big one?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we like any election matter. Those time is of the essence when someone is litigating something, so we know we have to prioritize. I get emails all the time on election cases, issues. We need a vote by 4 o'clock tomorrow,
Yeah.
and I get together with my clerks and we look at the law, we look at the facts, and we cast that vote and we prioritize that because people need the courts to resolve impasses.
Yeah, it is the job, right? Mhm.
It is.
Um, so you talked about having a conviction integrity task force. Can you describe what that is?
Sure, that was a task force that Chief Justice O'Connor, at my request, she created it right when I joined the court in 2019. And we were supposed to work a year, but COVID delayed a lot of that. But we got together with a lot of judges, attorneys, people who advocate for wrongful convictions, the Innocence Project, the Ohio Public Defender's Wrongful Conviction Unit, um, appellate court judges, the Attorney General's office was represented, and we discussed for a year, how we deal with preventing wrongful conviction on the front end of the system, and how once it occurs, as we know it will in any system that is made up of human beings making decisions, um, how we can remedy those wrongful convictions as soon as possible. And I think we came up with some great recommendations. One of which I talked about at the beginning of the show, which require hearings. If your listeners are out there and they want to support that legislation, they should contact the Representative Dontavius Gerald.
Oh, okay.
He's introducing that legislation and looking for co-sponsors, and he wants it to be bipartisan, as it should be, because this is not a partisan issue. It's about public safety. It's about in America, I consider wrongful conviction to be the worst form of injustice, because it takes away what we value the most as Americans, and that's our freedom. And so, yeah, I think this would be a big step in the right direction. But the task force has all sorts of recommendations. Independent Innocence Commission is one of the proposals, and I think there's a report available on the task force findings on the Ohio Supreme Court website. If you go to the Conviction Integrity Task Force page, you'll be able to download that report and see the recommendations that were made. And I think, and if anybody has any questions or wants to get involved in advocacy for this, they can certainly contact me, and I'd be able to put them in the right direction for that. Because I intend to continue advocating for this, because I think it's just necessary to eliminate wrongful convictions and the problems inherent in a non-transparent system.
Yeah. Have you ever seen the movie The Penalty?
No, I don't think I've seen that one.
It's really good, but it's about death row. And one of the attorneys in Columbus and Franklin County, he was featured in the film, and it showed three different stories about the death penalty. One man, he was wrongfully convicted and he was released. Another man, he was wrongfully convicted and executed. And then another man, he was mentally ill. He was guilty, but they were showing how when someone is convicted of death row, they go through a series of hearings. And so this family, every year they would have to keep going to court. And since this young man was mentally ill, that made it even worse, and it caused more delays. And so but in Ohio, where are they at now with the death row sentencing? Because I know that they've had several issues with the process and it being cruel and unusual. And because this attorney, he talked about how inhumane it was. And I mean, when you think of death row, you don't really think about it being humane, but with the new chemical, what do they call it? The new chemical combination or potion that they came up with, the three different chemicals, that wasn't effective. And it took them 20 minutes to basically kill this guy. And he was rapping. And I mean, it was just really
Are you
horrible.
talking about the Alabama case, or?
No, it was here in Ohio.
Well, the death penalty in Ohio has not on no one's been put to death since Governor DeWine.
Yeah, it was several years ago
Uh,
when it happened.
Yeah, so it's still on the books. It's still being prosecuted, but it hasn't been carried out under the DeWine administration. And
I
I
thought
believe
they recently ruled that they were going to start them back up and they were coming up with a new process.
there's advocacy taking place
Yeah.
right now for that, but nothing. I don't think anything has been passed. There was some legislation to abolish the death penalty. I
Yeah.
don't. It, I don't think it was ever. I know it wasn't passed yet, but
Yeah.
there's still advocates out there doing for that. So it goes back to what we talked about earlier. It's like if you don't like the law, you take as Americans, you're free to take advocacy to change the law.
I just find it interesting how pro-life, legislators or politicians are also for the death row. It just seems like a, you know, conflict of interest or
Well, as a judge, I don't like to comment on policy because
yeah,
I'm not a policymaker. My
yeah,
job is to follow the law, and that's what I do.
yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I
Yeah,
really
thank you for
appreciate it.
having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Conversation and thank you for shining a light on these issues, especially about wrongful conviction. That's something I'm really passionate about.
So what is the process to get sorry, I have to ask. What is the process to get these changes made that you want to have? Because it seems to me if we had the processes in place that it would make everything more efficient.
Yes.
It would save
Yeah.
time, it would save money. I mean, so
Right. Yeah,
what is
because
the hang up?
some people who have actually been exonerated after years of fighting in the system, they have been paid taxpayer dollars
I know.
okay, for all the time that they spent in
Yeah.
prison. This is in
It's
the
a lot of
millions of
money.
dollars and the millions of dollars, and people are studying the dockets of those individuals right now as we speak to kind of identify when when this could have been remedied earlier in the system, and the amount of delay caused by the system has amounted to taxpayers spending a lot of money unnecessarily, not to mention the lives of the people who had to suffer while the wheels of justice moved, way too slowly for them.
Um, that's also the same with police brutality. Excuse me. Um, Ohio is at the top in terms of, payouts for police being murdered by police, people being murdered by police. Would you say that that would be like an abuse of, I don't know, power, or what would that be considered in terms of the financial aspect of it?
Well, I've never seen any data that indicates, where that reflects that. But yeah, I mean, what there are mechanisms in our democracy that you can that keep power in check, and I have a lot of friends who are police officers and they take their job seriously,
Yeah,
and they don't like when one of their members, just like I feel if a judge abuses their power, right?
yeah,
Like that is something that hurts the entire system. If you find out, and we've had judges reprimanded in our disciplinary process for abusing their power. There was one judge in the state who arrested a spectator in the courtroom, and they were reprimanded, and rightfully so, because when a judge abuses their power, and police, I think all the good police officers feel the same way. They don't like anybody that abuses the power in the system, and there's always remedies, and there needs to be remedies to keep that in check.
yeah, yeah. I wasn't really talking about that though. I was just talking about the financial piece of it. I mean, in
Yeah.
terms of, would that be considered like I don't know, financial waste, or you know what I mean? So, I mean, if we
Yeah.
have,
And anytime you can prevent, wrongdoing in the first place,
yeah,
to that unnecessarily ends out in payout, like in the wrongful conviction case, we
right,
should move in that direction.
right. What's the legal term? I know, like, if you take someone to court over and over and over, it's like abuse of the judicial system. Isn't that what
Abuse of
that?
process. Yeah.
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 What would the financial equivalent be
I
for
don't know.
ineffectiveness?
Yeah. Yeah. It's just basic, plain old inefficiency that we need to
Yeah.
remedy.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. And good luck with your race. I'm
Yeah.
sure that you will win again. So, yeah, I look forward to having you. It's good to know that we have some good ones in there.
All right. Well, thanks for the interview, and I really appreciate it. And hopefully, I'll come on again sometime in the future.
Yes. I hope we both are celebrating in November.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Bye bye. Thank you for joining us in the Leadership Podcast, a podcast designed to inform, educate, and empower you. I'm your host, Tammy Wilson. I hope today's show inspired you to take your next step in leadership in your life, in your community, and our world. I know together we can make the world a better place. Thank you, and see you next time. Until then, live to lead.